Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exclusive Boom Room interview. I'm Sasha with Arcana Ventures. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, as always, Carmelo. Today, we have the pleasure of introducing Jeff Tchui, the Vice President and Head of APAC at the Hedera Foundation. Jeff, thanks so much for coming on. How are you doing?
Great, really awesome. Thanks for having me. I actually just got back from the US from a trip with the rest of the Hedera Foundation people, and love to share exactly what we're doing.
So we're going to dive into, man. We want to learn all about what's happening with Hedera. You guys have been a top 20 cryptocurrency for a long time. We've run into each other a number of times within Southeast Asia, and I know that you're very busy making a lot of different connections, speaking with a lot of different teams, and working on expanding the Hedera Foundation and the Hedera ecosystem as well. Before we dive in, though, we start this interview in the same boring way every single episode, and that's with a single question to you, which is give us an idea of who is Jeff Tchui? How did you get into the world of Web3 or crypto? And how did you end up here today speaking with us on behalf of the Hedera Foundation?
Yeah, honestly, I've always been like a technology and engineering tech geek. I started, a lot of people say like Web 2 or whatnot. I was really into traditional systems. So I was consulting for, large corporations, trying to help them transform cloud transformation, AI automation, ERP, CRM systems. And it wasn't until COVID that I got sucked into, the Web3 world properly. It was with at that time, a Hedera council member, DLA Piper, which is a law firm. They were looking to create a tokenization platform, or at that point, they weren't quite sure what they wanted to do, but they knew they wanted to do something with tokenization. We ended up, developing a tokenization platform. We got a lot of support from the Hedera ecosystem at that time. The foundation did not exist back then, so Hedera proper supported us with technology, with grants, and then also with tons of marketing support. Fast forward, that platform received licensing from Dubai, Vara specifically, and then over many months post that, the project kind of took a life of its own. And then ever since that, I've been involved in the Hedera ecosystem one way or another. After that, I got working with the Swiss association. Was involved with advisory, some ventures work, and then eventually took a break from Hedera, went out and explored the ecosystem to the maximum extent that I could. I learned a lot, and then now rejoining the Hedera ecosystem through the foundation and bringing as much of those insights into the APAC growth focus. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Nice. In what capacity were you working with some of the ecosystem companies? Were you like more hands on the advisory side, or were you working with some individual companies like full time?
Yeah, so it was super hands-on. The time that I was with the project with DLA Piper, it was literally building the product out. So from the front end, back end, integration with the middleware, getting to know what the partners of the law firm were looking to do, working throughout the law firm itself, and then also dealing with the life of a startup inside of a corporate enterprise. And that's in the DNA of Hedera. And Hedera itself is an enterprise grade chain. We have a lot of things that we've focused on from a tooling and infrastructure perspective that really makes a lot of sense to corporations. And basically, after building and being very active in launching the products, moving it more into the kind of strategic management, expansion, go-to-market phase, looking at every jurisdiction that made sense for the product to expand in, and then really getting into a lot of policy work. And that's actually another hat that I wear. Hedera is the founding protocol member of a Web3 association here in Hong Kong, where I'm based, Web3 Harbor. And it's just through that kind of marriage of institutional pedigree and background from the Hedera side, plus a lot of the policy work and advocacy that we need to do to educate both enterprises, private sector, and also public sector and policymakers, is where we kind of have our unfair advantage compared to maybe some other, let's say, ecosystems.
Interesting. I wanted to take a step back real quick too and ask like what actually is Hedera, because I imagine a lot of our viewers maybe they've heard of it before. It is a top 20 cryptocurrency, but it kind of flies under the radar compared to some of the other contemporaries. But usually we're fans of these types that are busy building and working with real companies rather than making noise on crypto Twitter. But if you could give us a high level overview about what Hedera actually is, what it's doing, how it's evolved since 2017, the founding in 2017, that would be great just for our own knowledge and for our viewers.
Sure, of course. No, Hedera has been around since 2018. That's when the white paper went out for circulation. Got a lot of institutional interest at that time. 2019, mainnet launched, and we got our first group of governing council members. The unique aspect of Hedera is the fact that we do have a list of corporate Fortune 500 companies that are securing the network for us. So what does that mean? That means they're operating the nodes, they're signing transactions, they're participating in governance and making sure that the protocol is managed in a way where it is in the best interest of the people that are using the network. Underlying on the technology perspective, Hedera is a DAG, so it's not necessarily a blockchain. We are getting into a little bit more technical side. We are ABFT, asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant. Not very many DLT projects are actually achieving that level of consensus and security. The other thing that's unique about Hedera is, besides the fact that we're governed by a group of Fortune 500 companies which are OFAC compliant, we're also we don't have surge pricing. We don't have exposure to surge pricing. What that means is our fees are fixed against US dollar based fees, even if the amount of HBAR or the value of HBAR goes up and down. So that's a little bit of a unique thing. And like from an enterprise perspective, from a corporate perspective, it gives the ability for product teams, finance teams to forecast the consumption and the usage of the network, which is very important when it comes to, when you're trying to run like a large business with billions and trillions of transactions.
Yeah, it's super interesting because, we know Hedera as, I think, referring to itself as an open source public network. And there are some huge names when it comes to the backing and the securing of the network. I'm talking about like Dell, Ubisoft, I believe it's Hitachi, LG, IBM, Google. And so it's interesting hearing that you have like this avoidance of surge pricing through that mechanism in the payment side, which makes sense for a more enterprise-based application. But I think in the past couple of years, we've seen more big players and tech companies talk about launching some of their own blockchain networks for different purposes. But taking a step back to the initial founding, like what was this sort of driving interest coming from all these big players and getting involved together under one roof under Hedera?
Yeah, I think the at that time, 2019, 2020, if you move back, Hyperledger Fabric, Corda, those were, the big enterprise blockchain players, right? Private permission networks. The fact that Hedera at that time came out as a public permission network was a little bit unique. And it allowed experimentation from like sharing of resources of a singular network and have utility-based approach, where you could literally have all of the requirements that a large enterprise would need across multiple different industries, in a way where the users of the network could trust each other to actually run the node and infrastructure. I think that was a very unique selling proposition at the time for people jumping into, let's say, the governing council. And the fact of the matter was, like, fully private permission networks at that time they were very expensive, not very scalable. And the other thing too is the decentralized coefficient. One of the unique things I didn't actually talk about earlier about Hedera itself is, one of the biggest knocks that I always get back in the day was like, wow, you only have 30 some nodes, 40, like up to 39 nodes. How is that decentralized? Well, I'll tell you this: if you look at other networks and protocols, it is a market made situation. So what you end up having is that you go to AWS, GCP, and Azure even for some, and you find out that the concentration of nodes are only in the fastest corridors. And so like if you have a network downage, it's usually the nodes within like, Belgium and Germany, or like, Hong Kong and Singapore or something. And when those nodes go down, the majority of the network goes down. And so that's something that's uniquely different about Hedera and our basically background ethos and our technology team. We're very clear when a governing council member joins, there's a requirement of, let's say, how much public cloud you could use, what should be on premise, what kind of private infrastructure would be from a data center perspective, and all of the, let's say, compute and storage requirements that would be required to actually launch a node on Hedera. It's really, really well managed. So our decentralization coefficient is actually much higher, even though we have fewer nodes.
Actually, that's especially important after what happened last week with the AWS downtime on last Monday. We actually did a space on it last week, and something that's very interesting. And we realized that not many companies building in blockchain, even blockchains themselves, are not that decentralized. They have a very poor coefficient. So how has Hedera, are you using this at all to market or advertise, or are you hitting this message hard right now, especially now with that going on last week?
I think from the foundation's perspective, like we have many different narratives, and we stay focused on like our builders, like builder first, and then also our growth, ecosystem growth, which involves both retail and enterprise use cases. I think when it comes to the technology components of let's say different value propositions or USPs, we've naturally, as a Hedera ecosystem, always focus on those, and realize that sometimes that message doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone. And so, even though it is a unique kind of like time to talk about it, I don't think it fits within our kind of vision and purpose, which is focusing on growing the ecosystem, working with builders, providing community commerce and capital to really grow the ecosystem, and then focusing on real impact on transactions with accounts and whatnot. But in a way where we're not just saying, okay, how many accounts can you create this month? We want to look at a situation where a new account created is incentivized in a way where they stay on the network, keep transacting, and then add additional value, right? And that's what we've been seeing on the Hedera side, which is unique. We haven't necessarily seen a trend of that happen on a multi-month basis where, new accounts or new projects that come online, users come on, they stay on, they find out, wow, hey, they bridge in and say, this is pretty cool, and then they stay. And I think that's what's different about Hedera in this cycle than other cycles.
It's a completely different demographic for targeting builders, right? And I'm curious around Hedera's viewpoint and how it's kind of affected this narrative or chasing this vision based on what we've seen unfold in the past year. There's always different metas coming through this cryptocurrency or blockchain industry. And now I think the big ones are around real world asset tokenization, stablecoin infrastructure, new DeFi around like perpetuals, futures trading, and different types of tokenization of derivatives. And so I'm curious, has Hedera decided to, or has the foundation decided to try and embrace any of these metas or narratives? Or is it something that like within the existing tool set allow you guys to quickly access this type of growing market? Or is it just staying right on path, what you guys have been doing since 2018?
No, we changed significantly. I think just from both like personnel as well as from posture and then just narratives. Right? You want to stick to that taxonomy. I think what it is we're not necessarily focused on, again, like I said earlier, only the tech capabilities and the functionality, but how you actually bring all this technology together to actually have impactful solutions. And brings back to the point of stablecoins, RWAs, and artificial intelligence, which are the three main metas that are really driving our let's say focus at the foundation in the ecosystem. And it started with STOs back in 2019, 2020, and then it was NFTs, and then it was DeFi spring, and then DeFi summer. And all of these different things over time, which they were really technology components or Hedera improvements that allowed functionality to happen. We've aggregated all these things. And so, like, look, we need to figure out ways to help our builders, help our community accelerate what they do. And we also want to stop giving out grants for the same thing over and over and over again, right? And I think that's where you start to see a lot of these open source toolkits and accelerators that have been actually created. So we have what's known as a asset tokenization studio, which allows you to tokenize an asset and then bring it to mainnet. And then you choose the venue and jurisdiction in which you want to operate with the regulatory framework that backs it, right? And then we also have a stablecoin studio where a financial institution or maybe an individual business can say, like, I want to experiment and test what it would be like to adopt a stablecoin in my business. And then using that studio, you can really just, you don't have to hire a development team and really, integrate everything. You just deploy it, play with it, see how it behaves, how it doesn't behave. And then you commit to, let's say, a deeper level of integration or usage inside your business. And then finally, on the AI studio, what we focused on is, and my AI team is probably going to think like, well, why did you represent the AI studio like this? But it's really the bare bones necessity of what you would need to build agentic AI on mainnet with Hedera. And so instead of, let's say, a comprehensive like AI builder toolkit or anything like that, we're focusing on, okay, what is the user interface with the UX and UI? How do you deploy the MCP server specifically for agentic, like launching an AI agent and then having the orchestration? How does that tie into using our core services in Hedera, which is consensus service, token service, and smart contract service, right? How does all of this stuff come together? And these are we've listened to our developers and we listen to our builder ecosystem. That's what they want, right? And so I think that's the difference between Hedera today than maybe Hedera in the past, where we were more prescribing the technology that ought to be adopted, versus now it's where we're listening to the ecosystem and then we're trying to merge what's inherent in the gaps of the current Web3 ecosystem with where we need to be in the future.
I'm wondering if that's been part of the success about how you've been able to manage to attract all these big companies to build with you. And I wanted to ask, like, I'm especially fascinated since Hedera is so decentralized. It's a foundation. How has that messaging looked for attracting these Fortune 500 companies? And how does that messaging differ when you're looking to attract like smaller builders within Web3, more Web3 native builders? Because Sasha and I always obsess over how blockchains manage to attract builders, for instance. Usually, like you mentioned, it's all about giving grants. This is a big percentage of it, but how do you find these users? How do you attract them?
Yeah, I think personas and messaging is important, right? I think in the past, like recruiting a corporate to jump on a council to like run a node, it's not easy stuff. It takes a long time. Right? Yeah. It takes like 12, 18 months, sometimes even longer. And really, it's all about potentially understanding, okay, how does the technology actually is a value proposition to the core business that enterprise is running. And so we do a lot of like, conversations, workshops, and back and forth, like what kind of use cases could you bring? Like what kind of ecosystem benefits would you derive being part of the Hedera ecosystem? We're lucky because we have a great team of individuals across the ecosystem, from Hashgraph to the foundation to like the LOC to the core council, and then also from the association and our other peers. And what they do is then they come in and provide thought leadership. They do workshops for potential use case discovery, and then providing the right support. So it's really speaking the same language as a lot of these kind of large corporations, because at the end of the day, when you bring a new technology in the space, I used to do a lot of cloud work, and it was so difficult selling cloud back in like 2014, 15, right? and then you literally have to talk to like legal compliance, procurement, you have to talk to business, you have to talk to IT, and then there's somebody that comes out of nowhere, right? It's just like random, like some other team that you never even heard about, and it slows down the conversation. Hedera understands this, right? So we go and we're very comprehensive with having the right kind of toolkits, conversations, and then also bringing everybody to the table properly. So that's on the enterprise side. That's how we get the enterprises to be comfortable. On the builder side, our tech stack is very friendly. Like the core stack is Java and Node.js, so it's very compatible. And we also have other accelerators. We have Rust adapter, and then also a couple of different languages as well. And these languages are easy for the current builders who maybe come out of school or have been working in traditional development roles for like most of their career, just to jump up and test and try Hedera. And now it's even easier with these toolkits, like these open source accelerators and studios. And so we're just relatively friendly in terms of, if you want to try, that's great. If you want to actually build, that's obviously better. And then we have the support and enough fidelity across our ecosystem to support you in multiple different ways. And we have grants as well as ventures to kind of bring you to the next level.
Yeah, sort of like a low stakes, try it out, see how you like it. If it fits, we're happy to help you continue that journey, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then, sorry to interrupt. And the other thing is like going back to compliance. I think compliance is for institutions such a big deal. The fact, one great thing about having, I mean, some might say it's great, others may not. But from our perspective as a protocol, having a known list of node operators that are Fortune 500 companies, you're OFAC compliant, right? So once you have that compliance, then it's almost table stakes for large companies to come in and use the protocol. There's no question from compliance saying or legal saying like, oh, where are these nodes coming from? How are these transactions being signed? Is it someone on the blacklist or on the gray list? You don't have these conversations, which is great when it comes to like reaching out to enterprise participants.
Yeah, on that same note, like we don't hear the same type of conversation from other what you might refer to as like leading layer one ecosystems, and there isn't this much focus on compliance or let's say OFAC compliance and regulation. And so, do you feel like Hedera Foundation has done a lot of groundwork in trying to set this standard and potentially be like this template for other networks to build off of, but more importantly, for large Fortune 500 companies or different types of organizations and ecosystems looking to get into the world of blockchain or adopt blockchain rails? Or is this sort of like an uphill battle from your perspective you've seen so far?
Yeah, Hedera and Hedera's ecosystem, and I want to give due credit for like the entire ecosystem, right? The foundation is a very critical pillar of growth and adoption, but we couldn't do it without the council, and we can't really do it without our partners over at Hashgraph, which is basically the technology apparatus that really drive all of the innovations that coming to the network. Within the Hedera ecosystem, we have a very strong policy team. And the policy team has been outstanding, both on the US, talking to different stakeholders in Capitol Hill, to the international side, where reaching out to different policymakers in different jurisdictions, doing education pieces, doing thought leadership, and then also participating in consultations. And it's through all of these different activities that we get the visibility, the outreach, and even Sasha, you and I, we've been doing some work over in Vietnam, right, with the Da Nang IFC, right? And you multiply this by multiple different geos for my counterparts as well in both North America, LATAM, AMENA, and et cetera. And you see like Hedera is actually a very active in making sure that we cover all of the different bases when it comes to on the retail side as well as on the institutional side. But what that really means is private and public sector, right? And those things coming together is extremely important. To answer your question in a different way as well, like it is and has been a uphill battle. We all remember the days of the SEC and having their sights on XRP and Ripple, and that really affected Hedera for quite some time, because we were literally in a very similar kind of category, a US-based blockchain or US-based DLT organization that is having market activities. So how do we stay in line? And that's where our policy posture and the maturity of a lot of the work that we've been doing is really evolved. And now we're turning it into more market development activities instead of like market kind of risk management activities. So it's been very helpful for us over the years.
And for going back to like the Fortune 500 Council and the governance model, because like we said, we're fascinated by actual decentralization, and we know it's a lot harder when you're decentralized to make some decisions sometimes, or to segment the company appropriately, who does what. So a lot of companies within our industry pretend that they're decentralized when in actuality there's one or a few people directing every decision. But we just wanted to ask about, like, what's your view on, like, what have you learned so far on institutional adoption? We know it takes forever, like you mentioned, like 12 to 18 months sometimes for these big behemoth companies to, dip their toe in the water, check the temperature, see if it's safe. Now it's a little bit better this year and last year. More institutions are coming in. But what has that been like? Sasha and I, like, also, we prefer working with these kinds of companies that are more professional, more mature. They have exploratory committees in Web3 so that they test the waters first instead of just diving headfirst in. But we know it's painfully slow. So what has that been like, that journey for attracting these companies and working with them, and, having the patience to work with these companies and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I'll just say, like, working with enterprises, it's a people business. Even though you have the big name and you have the corporate processes and structures in place, also risk management controls. There's always a way to manage those rules and regulations, parameters, and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's really understanding who the stakeholders are, reaching the right people, and then clearing blockers where they need to be cleared. And so I think it has been it hasn't been fast, but it hasn't also been impossible. And so the thing is, having the right kind of like team behind you is also very important. Speaking the right language when it comes to what the expectations and what the requirements and the table stakes for actually getting a project over the line, or a POC over the line, is also very, very important. So I think Hedera has been highly focused on having the right people in place to actually drive this forward. And so overall, when you see value, and the value is actually shown both from metrics as well as qualitative adoption, I think it speaks for itself, and then that flywheel just keeps going. And I would want to give a shout out to the team, which is now known as Heat, led by Rob Allen. There is the Hedera Enterprise Adoption Team, and that is really to really push our council members to come up with use cases that are next level using the Hedera network. And we've gotten a lot of positive feedback. And then the team over at the foundation, led by Paul Rapino, has really been helping with that as well. So we're really excited to be part of this.
Yeah, just like one mini follow up here, like how, because we have clients, portfolio companies that ask us all the time, like, it's sort of a dream to link with even one of these companies or one government. It seems like you've had tremendous success there with the individuals you just mentioned. Do you have like a target list in mind or an outreach strategy? Obviously, you're right. It's about like looking beyond the logo. You have to build these and foster these connections with actual people. It's not just, oh, I got a connection to this company. But how do you know which companies to offer council spots to, and how do you get a hold of them? Like I said, now it's a little bit easier with crypto regulation being a little bit more involved. People are a little bit more excited about this industry than they were 3 or 4 years ago. But I just wanted to ask a little follow up about that.
Yeah, it's changed over the years, right? I was lucky enough to be part of one of the working subcommittees back in the day. It was called MEMCOM, Membership Committee. And the role and task of MEMCOM was to, as you said, like, identify candidates, right? Across the ecosystem. So we had people feeding in recommendation, referrals, and whatnot to see like who would be good fits, who would be a good fit. And it was always like, okay, Fortune 500 or Web3 native. And then how do we represent the ecosystem properly? I think we've gone to a point where we've defined what the base minimum requirements are for who we would like want to have as part of the governing council,
Yep.
and that is based on like market cap as well as employees, potentially even like corporate maturity index. But this is really driven by the teams that actually look at it now. I would say that there are, has been explorations of different tiers as well, because not all companies are created equally, and then to be truly inclusive, we need to have a look at more Web3 native companies as well, because our industry is, let's be like frank, it's like driven not only by it's not really driven by Web2 companies, it's driven by Web3 companies. So we need to have that representation from a mature and enterprise perspective as well. So look, I think what you'll see is if you look across like who our governing council members are now, there's a few categories that there's areas of improvement. One would be more on the healthcare side. Another would probably be on entertainment, travel, logistics, maybe airlines or whatnot. So, but we're very clear on like what the expectations are, and the team's working very hard to fill the remaining slots with the right candidates.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Looking back at like the core ethos of blockchain and Web3, many people within this industry they're familiar with like the core pillars, and we talk about, for example, security through decentralization, transparency and accountability through immutable ledger technology and transaction record keeping. We've got all of these different types of core pillars that many of these people they see value in when they talk about like a digital asset economy, blockchain, tokenomics, etc. And we work very, very deeply in the space of tokenomics. We work with large companies and small startups, etc. And I'm curious to understand what the initial draw is that you guys saw back in the day from these companies coming on board and supporting Hedera. Using Google or IBM as an example, like they haven't launched any of their own sort of blockchain technologies publicly that we know of, but their reason for stepping into this space with Hedera must be because they see some value somewhere, or there's something planned on their future roadmap. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, with interacting between these companies, what do you feel is like the most important things that are coming up in conversations around like the use cases, why they're interested in blockchain, why they're interested in cryptocurrency technologies, why they're interested in on-chain data storage or decentralization, consensus mechanism, things like that?
Yeah, look, I think there was one of the draws in the very early days, especially because the initial council or even enterprise that came on were more looking at it from an academic perspective, because it was so early on, right? As I said earlier in this conversation, it was like private permission, how does hybrid work? We're not ready for fully public permissionless. And then there's another element to it is, on the academic side, it's like this trilemma issue, right? Like you can't literally have all three: scalability, security, and speed. And basically at that time, the Hashgraph consensus mechanism technically was achieving all three without compromise. And that in itself was like an initial draw. Is like, okay, let's explore this, different way of doing DLT at first. And then that led to kind of drinking the Kool-Aid and then getting into the council, like building use cases, and then realizing, wow, this is actually a pretty interesting ecosystem. So I think that's the natural draw. Like it was like, as you said, like, okay, what are these kind of promises and first principles of Web3 that that corporations or even builders are looking for, the ecosystem is looking for, and then what was the core problem that you couldn't literally solve, like our value proposition, and it was literally the trilemma solution. And then over time, it's now about, okay, the tooling. Okay, how do you draw more people with friendly tooling, EVM compatibility for interoperability, and then also the other business components of it, which is basically on the commercial side, having fixed fees, having compliance and OFAC compliance, right? Those are the things that, as you get the basic core, you start wrapping all of the functional requirements around it, and then you have a very compelling solution for enterprises. Let's say that's kind of like the evolution of how we actually got our value proposition, and then turned into a unique differentiator.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's still evolving as we go. Like we're waiting to see what happens with a lot of these companies as they get more interested in this technology and what they plan on rolling out in future development. And looking on the other side, I think you're in an incredible position to give us some insight in what's happening with that kind of like startup foundational builder ecosystem. You mentioned that Hedera Foundation and your tech partners have developed some very interesting technology that's been released recently. I believe in the past year, you guys have launched the AI Studio. You've got, from what I understand, a browser-based IDE known as the Contract Builder. You've got the Tokenization Toolkit. And so there's a lot of technological advances here and innovations and advantages compared to other layer one developer ecosystems. But from our own perspective, when we're working with some of our advisory clients, we're talking to startups, they constantly ask this question about like which layer one should I build on or which layer two should I build on. What kind of advantages do I get in building there? And the questions aside from tooling and development support usually lie in the realm of like access to liquidity and the other ecosystem players that are there. And so I'm curious from your perspective in talking with some of these builders, what does that conversation sort of linger on? Is it more of like the tech innovations and advancement you guys are making, or is it more of like the network effects that you see are becoming so important in some of these layer one ecosystems?
Yeah, so I think over the many cycles, some of the projects that were built probably were built on more attractive protocols at that time, layer ones and layer twos. But then over time, as those projects scale, then the network is congested. They run into performance issues. They don't meet their checkpoints. Maybe the network goes down, or heaven forbid, like some of the networks lose liquidity through hacks and vulnerabilities on the bridges, right? And then so projects are looking for new homes, and that's a category of builders that come to Hedera, and so we need to be ready to kind of re-platform, rehome, or even extend compatibility on an EVM basis to those projects. So that's a different conversation with that category. And then we have like the hardcore diehard believers of like HTS and our native technology stack. And they come in and they say like, look, we want to, maybe it's an institution that is on a clean slate and they want to tokenize their assets in a way where it's like, low cost, scalable, and et cetera. Or maybe they want to fully adopt our EVM compatibility infrastructure from day zero. And that's a completely different conversation, right? And then that goes back to what you're saying. Some of this would require open source studios to help people accelerate and catch up with the development process. Others are just extensions of either SDKs or some of our API libraries to allow people to re-platform their projects immediately. And so that's really where it's coming from. Obviously, there's a situation where sometimes and most times projects will be coming from an ecosystem that has much higher liquidity than Hedera. And at that point, we also realize that's something that not only the foundation, but the ecosystem needs to really focus on. And we've been doing a fantastic job, especially through some of the work of the growth team, the ecosystem team over at the foundation, led by James Hodgkins. And it's really about making sure that we have enough, the first principles, like enough stablecoin liquidity to actually drive a lot of this like DeFi activity. And then we also have venues in which people can actually benefit, whether it's like lending and borrowing options and protocols, perp dexes, as well as prediction markets. And then even on the regular dexes as well, with saucer swap and whatnot. It's really supporting all of these different core critical infrastructure in getting enough liquidity. So that's also another area that we've been very active in.
Yeah, and Sasha and I like review blockchains all the time, and like you said, like we get asked this all the time, even by people that are not our clients or not in our portfolio, and they ask us what do we recommend. And one of the two things we look for is development activity, and it appears Hedera is quite high in that, like top 3 in development, core development activity, and then ecosystem activity. how many founders are attracted to building there. Not just Fortune 500 companies, like you said, but actual native degen, or they just want to try it out and see what they can do, become a superstar in the ecosystem. And for those of us that are ignorant to what's going on in the ecosystem, are there any like superstar projects you could think of, or anybody building in Hedera right now that we should be paying attention to? Because Sasha and I are not the most familiar with who's actually building there, and that is the first thing we look for actually on the website or the portfolio, or who's most active in your actual ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's start with the DeFi side, right? We're super excited with obviously SaucerSwap has been a fantastic success. Bonzo, lending and borrowing platform protocol for us has also been extremely value add to the ecosystem. Moving forward, we do have a perp dex launching. And so I'm really excited about that. We haven't committed on the name, but do watch out for it because it's something that's exciting. From a staking perspective, we've also increased our staking rewards. And so that's another thing to be really excited about. And I think that was announced a couple of days ago. So overall, in terms of from a project perspective on the DeFi side, these different ecosystem plays are really exciting. From an enterprise perspective, there's the Australia stablecoin, the AUDD, that has been released and very active on socials. We also have another key project in the ecosystem called Red Swan. They've been tokenizing real estate assets across the Gulf region in different venues around the world. And then we also have another partnership with Binary Holdings, which is a telecommunications-based mobile payments solution that is tied to basically loyalty rewards and whatnot with carriers in Southeast Asia, and this is another, and even global, and this is another very exciting area as well. From the government side and government nature projects, there is and has been a very active relationship with the DIFC courts in Dubai. The Hedera Foundation and the Hedera ecosystem, namely the Hashgraph Association, has been supporting them with the build out of a lot of critical technologies when it comes to sovereign data management and whatnot for notarization, for arbitration and dispute management, as well as what they call Tajori, the will management service and the registration service. And so really excited about all these different use cases that have been on the ecosystem. There's so many more. We have another activity with PHPX, which is in the Philippines, and then several different use cases around our our council members that they've been working on for many years, like Tata Communications with their roaming settlement platform, and then Mondelez, which is the parent company of Oreo, which has launched their coupon system on Hedera with their partner SKUX, as well as a couple of other payments use cases that are coming over the line soon.
It's a very thorough answer.
Yes. There's so much there. And
there's so many more. I'm literally scratching the surface. That's maybe 3% of the total list. Yeah. So
it's very enterprise focused, and it besides maybe the perp dex, it's very not degen focused, right? So it's very exciting to hear, especially around what's happening in the stablecoins. Fun note, I just learned in last week's Boom Room interview that Walmart is launching its own stablecoin apparently. So that's fun to figure out. But I want to talk to you a little bit about emerging trends, and not really an emerging trend, but maybe a continuing trend on this first one. It's the idea that I think you and I might have touched on before. The layer one wars that we just continue to see unfold. And there are a lot of different layer one networks that are super hyped. They're coming to market, and they're coming to market with it seems like the only moat that they're depending on is some sort of technological advantage in the sense of metrics like transaction throughput or what have you, right? And Monad being a good example of one that is pursuing a multi-billion-dollar valuation, with an ecosystem that seems to be mostly made up of, let's say, interoperable protocols that are built on virtually every EVM compatible network. And so I want to understand from your perspective, what is the drive for some of these teams to continue pursuing developing like the next and latest and greatest layer one when they're entering such a competitive arena where Hedera and others sit? They've got the staying power. They've got a lot of technological development. They've got innovations coming out every single year, and they have very, very strong and growing relations with governments and large organizations and large companies.
Yeah, so look, layer ones and even some layer twos, the proliferation and the growth was really tied to the VC cycles that happened maybe 3 years ago. So a lot of those layer ones came because the money was hot back 2, 3 years ago, and then hence why we are where we are today. And so finding, let's say, sustainable growth and revenue is not easy, especially when it comes to running a large scale decentralized infrastructure. And then again, one thing we didn't talk about is like what keeps people in these ecosystems, especially people who are kind of fishing for opportunistic rent seeking activities. It's airdrops, it's staking rewards, and so on. Those are not sustainable. Like you can get all the VC money as you could back in the day. You could create incentives for people to come into the ecosystem once. And I think I talked about this in the beginning as a metric, creating a wallet, but with no sustained activity. I think that's like a telltale sign of things to come. So I would say from our perspective, yes, we started early. We had several staffed rounds. We also have a very robust treasury management strategy, not only on the foundation side, but also in the entire Hedera ecosystem in general. And so that has helped us weather over the many different cycles, right? And I think that's another issue as well, is the treasury. So a lot of these layer ones that came up in recent years, except for exceptional few, like there's a few that have done fantastic, like Sui and etc. And I think that will also be another pressure point. Is you've got the VC money, you've expanded, you've got some of the users in, and maybe they're just projects that you could get over the line because you only had a few months and the lockup periods were within that specific pressure point. But then now there isn't, let's say, that kind of like consistency to go, because there's a lot of other interoperability solutions that have been built. And now on our side, even on Hedera side, we're embracing a lot of the EVM standards. And that is another area where it's like pressure from competition.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer, and it's something that we've seen unfold as well. Like there seems to be a huge earnings opportunity around backing a layer one blockchain in the early stages, and even to this day, I think we're connected with several layer ones or layer two solutions that are building on Ethereum that are continuing to get a lot of investor interest, and it seems like this trend might be fizzling out. But I suppose we'll see. I know Monad's coming up soon with their launch. A lot of other ones are coming up soon. And so for Hedera Foundation and Hedera ecosystem, nothing's changed. It's just business as usual. Keep on trucking forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and for us, like I think our approach is like specific out of Asia, right? Out of APAC, we look at every ecosystem as additive. So the more the merrier is validating that adoption is real. And if there are, let's say, participants that are finding niches and then helping to create new markets, then that's great for the entire ecosystem. So from my perspective, I always treat every ecosystem that comes into the Web3 industry as additive. And we don't necessarily see them as like, heavy competition or anything like that. I feel like it's just so much more. We have trillions and trillions of dollars from a capital markets and a traditional market infrastructure to bring into the Web3 ecosystem. We need as many channels to do this as possible.
Yeah, and lingering on APAC, actually, like I mentioned before, we've crossed paths a number of times in different countries in this region. And I know that your focus specifically is head of ecosystem for APAC. And so I'm curious your take. I'm sure you've been asked this question 100 times as I have. Like, do you feel that APAC is really primed for this type of like tech acceleration more so than other parts of the world?
Yeah, I think structurally I mean, geographically it is, right? So if you look at the United States, you look at Europe, there's 50 states, there's interstate laws, and then in Europe you have like the EU and whatnot. So you have single regulation in some parts of these large economic zones that make it easier from a Web2 perspective to transact. And so there's limited need for like transformative Web3 solutions. But if you look at APAC, it's like you go up and down. There's like 46 countries, right? From like Japan all the way down to Australia. There's way more than 46. I'm saying just go down the coastline, and then they all have their own currencies. They all have their languages, cultures, and different political systems and issues, right? And the thing is, and time zones. And so all of these different complex things that you would traditionally have closed, siloed databases to actually transact and go back and forth with FX and all other issues. It can be done so more in such a more efficient way with decentralized technologies, with stable coins, with artificial intelligence and Web3. So I think it's prime, and again, velocity is important, and velocity is driven by volume, and the world's population centers around this region. Between India, China, and Indonesia, you have billions of people just within a very tight economic center compared to, let's say, the whole of Africa, which is also growing, and then the whole of North America and South America combined.
Yeah, and you mentioned like stablecoins for I think the Australian stablecoin project building on Hedera.
Yep. Yep.
What have you seen in that particular zone, like for stables? And you also mentioned like in the MENA region, tokenization of real estate. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Hedera's had like more of a deep look into the RWA space and the tokenization of real world assets. We hate that term, but that's what people are familiar with in our industry. So real world assets, what is that looking like right now? And what are your thoughts on this being the next major use case? Also underpinning DeFi, which you mentioned is a heavy focus for you right now.
Yeah, I think the sake of tokenizing something doesn't necessarily make it a more like attractive asset. And I think that's what
Yeah.
you're getting at, right? Everything's real. It's just depending on does it perform. And so how does Web3 or how does DLT and blockchain and the services that we are all familiar with, decentralized services, tie back to making an asset perform better than it did before? Or can it? And then how does it generate additional cash flows or revenue streams that it couldn't generate before without the ability to share information in a secure or encrypted way with the cryptography and zero knowledge proof, and also the fact that you would use stablecoins to settle the cash and asset leg for DVP, and all of these different things that come together with tokenization is what we're really heavily focused on. So it's not like we tokenize everything, right? It's more so, okay, let's look at the base. Is it tokenized money market funds? Is it tokenized deposits, treasuries? And that's on the baseline. Then we move to stable coins, potentially even CBDCs in certain jurisdictions. That makes sense. And then finally, we look at the hard asset or the real asset. And then how are those assets positioned? Like, do they have revenue streams or cash flows that would require monitoring, compliance, and deep-in solutions? And then how do we put that all on chain so that we make the asset better? Another thing that we're focusing on heavily, especially on the capital markets team, is understanding how we can put the NAV on chain, which is so important, because if you don't have that, then I don't know what you're calculating, benchmarking, or from a valuation perspective. There's custody of a digital twin, but that digital twin has no value that you can put under management. And I think that's really important, because then it goes into the more, let's say, sophisticated conversations around taxation, triple entry accounting with stable coins. And then finally, derivative products that you can create off of those, which is very important, right? And especially from a DeFi perspective. trust is the main issue. So I think from Hedera's perspective, we're very let's say deep into a lot of these different conversations over the many years. And I do want to say that through the use cases of our builders and also our council members, and then other like people within our ecosystem who have had this background, talking to policymakers, really getting into the trenches of building assets and then taking them to market and launching them properly. I do have another colleague, Wes Geisenberger. He is really driven to look at ESG and impact. And one of the things that the compliance technology that's behind one of the core programs and platforms called Guardian 2.0, and soon to be Guardian, the next version of Guardian, is really driving a lot of these compliance frameworks together, right? And then putting everything on chain so it's transparent, trusted, value can be put against an asset, and then impact can also be measured. I think all of these things are extremely important, and we spent a considerable amount of like time, energy, and resources to create these different toolkits and frameworks. And I do want to mention that Guardian toolkit is or Guardian offering is also another open source solution, and probably the first one that came up besides the NFT Studio.
I love to hear about more free open source tools made available for people. But you just mentioned a point, like for a side question. Have you noticed any weird tension between, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you've noticed it, but tension between transparency versus privacy, especially when you're working with these huge institutions or governments? The space is supposed to be about transparency, but there's obviously a rising movement for secrecy or privacy and zero knowledge proofs. And what has that been like in your experience, especially within the context of like DeFi and RWAs?
Yeah, I mean, I have a controversial position on it. I think,
Perfect.
Let's go.
yeah, I think I feel that in order to get mass adoption, people need to have certain centralized structures in place. That's how you can actually build a customer service framework around it. Me being back in Web 2 days, and that is almost more important, almost like a social contract of a smart contract. That is almost more important to the user experience than having full, let's say, transparency and open decentralization. So that's my controversial position. With that said, I think there are technologies and solutions in place across the Web3 industry that will solve for these solutions, so we don't have to choose one or the other, right? So some of them being, as you said, zero knowledge proof or zero knowledge cryptography. Others would be selective disclosure and privacy frameworks that would be built into on-chain activities. And Hedera is like looking into how we do that, because I think it's also very important that we have privacy built in, but at the same time, we have the ability to have selective disclosure, right? So people who want to share can share. People who don't want to share don't need to share. I think that's also very important.
Yeah, interesting, and not so controversial of a take. I think that's pretty reasonable, actually. You're right about the social contract kind of outweighing the smart contract functionality.
Yeah, 100%. I think you said it very well when you said like this is the kind of foundation that customer support frameworks can be built on, and that's exactly right. And that's one of the reasons why you don't see many like fully decentralized autonomous social media platforms existing or continuing to exist because
Yeah.
somebody's going to get on there and just post something awful. But I wanted to linger on RWAs a little bit longer. And you mentioned that you guys are doing some very impressive work, and there is an ecosystem focus to penetrate deeper into the RWA space, at least facilitate the tokenization of specific real world assets or traditional financial instruments. And it's a question that I love asking people that are working directly with layer one networks. We've seen such an interesting approach to tokenized RWAs from different players. And there's been a lot of different layer one blockchain networks launching specifically for RWAs, just a few that come to mind, or I think Plasma with stable coins, Plume for just general RWAs. And it's difficult to try and, let's say, create a house for everyone to live in, because some of these different types of assets might trade in different ways on different markets. Like, for example, you wouldn't want the type of volatility or dependency on like automated market maker liquidity equations for something as that should be as stable as real estate. And I suspect that in the future, when we're talking about the tokenization of all these different types of assets, it's going to be something that's a little bit more compartmentalized or siloed. But I'm curious as to like how are we going to tackle the problem of interoperability or consolidation of all of this within, let's say, one big market. And so I'm curious on your take there. Is that something that Hedera sees as a problem, like coming into the RW space and having to compete with everyone else that has a financial incentive to be a hoarder? Or is it something that's going to kind of like fix itself when somebody figures out like a magic bullet bridge?
Yeah, I mean, there's many false starts that we gave provision support grants, and even the project that I was working on at the very early stages, like we found it very difficult. Interoperability wasn't necessarily even a thought. We didn't even have a market to build for, so we were trying to prime the market to begin with. But I think what it was how do we actually standardize data, and how is a tokenized asset consistent? Now, let's not even think about interoperable. That's consistent across different ecosystems, and this comes with standards, right? So the foundation, the Hedera Foundation and the Hedera ecosystem has been adopting ERC 3643, which is a evolution of ERC 20, and then one 1400, I should say. There's another one of that, but over time, this has become the RWA or STO standard. And by adopting this standard with other layer ones and protocols, we're able to actually have a consistent kind of like lowest common denominator when it comes to metadata and how it's structured, to allow for other interoperability frameworks to be built around. And this includes, bridging with Axelar layer 0, and other bridges, maybe more like ad hoc point-to-point bridges. But at the end of the day, the role of the protocol is to provide the tooling and also the liquidity to back these assets as well. And so, we focus on that. And so by adopting standards, we don't have to focus on, the various different ways that we can hit a moving target. By having that baseline, it's much easier for us to work with the different parties within the value chain, which are really asset issuer, the dealer and the broker, the venue in which it trades, for this OTC, centralized exchange, or a decentralized exchange. And then finally, asset servicing providers and the bankers, or not bankers, but like financial institutions that will be backing these assets. Because once you have those standards, then it's easy for them to provide the liquidity, integrate the solutions that they have on their Web 2 side. And interoperability is really, sometimes we always think about interoperability as Web 3 to Web 3, but really in my mind, interoperability is Web 2 to Web 3. There are so many more standards and systems that are on the Web 2 side that need to be interoperable with Web 3. And so I think that's where Hedera also looks like we define interoperability, not just between ecosystems. We also define it within structures and solution architectures.
Yeah, that's perfect time to mention it, because we also see interoperability between industries as well. And you mentioned before, or I think Sasha mentioned that the AI tooling that you're working on as well. I wanted to ask your opinion on the intersection between blockchain and AI, and what are some exciting emerging use cases you see in this area as well, because I think I saw an interesting statistic the other day that over 50% of all funding this year in 2025 so far has been for AI startups. And I don't know if that means they've just lightly integrated it or if they're building entirely around that. But one thing's clear, that AI is here to stay. It's one of the most dominant narratives for VCs for investing. So how are you using this to kind of catapult Hedera, catapult blockchain? Do you see these two going hand in hand, like they're two sides of the same or a similar coin?
Yeah, no, look, so one my colleague and counterpart, Ash Oro, he has been really the face of a lot of the AI activities for the foundation. Himself and Paul Rapino, which I mentioned earlier in the call, in the podcast, has been working with a grantee and a partner of ours called EQT Labs, Equity Labs. They have a very unique solution where basically on the memory enclave of basically the newest chips from both Intel and NVIDIA, able to provision Hedera services to track provenance of compute. And this is really fantastic. And working alongside Accenture to really take this to market. And those are the things that I would say like are exciting for us in terms of getting into ground level computational provenance coming from like the actual devices before getting into agentic AI, because that's a different level of engagement at that point in time. You're getting into the data center level. You can build impact sustainable use cases. You can build data governance use cases, provenance, traceability, reporting, compliance, everything. And this is a trust issue, right? And as we get into a world that's more integrated with AI, you need to trust where this black box activity is coming from, and this is a unique value proposition that's coming from Hedera.
Yeah, that's sort of what I had in mind as well. But it's really encouraging to see that you agree with that, or you guys are building around that. We could probably go on all day talking about this because I'm fascinated. I'm learning a lot about what you guys are working on. So we're going to have you on another time.
No
But I
worries.
think we
Had a great
have
time.
two wrap up questions that usually end the interviews with. So I just wanted to ask because, like, like I mentioned, we have a lot of founders, we have a lot of good people working in the industry that watch these, so it's a good, valuable learning resource. So, do you have any great advice for founders or people looking to get into the industry, or maybe people already in the industry that are looking to, work on something they're passionate about, or looking for companies or opportunities? Just anything that you've learned, any takeaways in the last several years? Because I think a lot of people got into crypto around the time of COVID as well. Something interesting about that. But yeah, people are getting in every day more and more as we see it dominating the news cycle. So, any general advice for founders? Doesn't even have to be Web3 native. It could be any startup founders.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets back to like resilience on the fact that our industry has such tight cycles that really test your your commitment and
Yeah.
conviction. So again, like having a team in the very onset of you starting a project that that can go through the ups and downs with you is extremely important. I've seen great projects. I've been part of great projects and great teams, but didn't have the right DNA to begin with because we were just kind of scrap people who had capabilities and skills together, but didn't really mesh when it came to the actual like values, right? And I think building a team, especially in Web3, with values in mind. Are you here to make money? Are you here to change the world? Like, are you here to do both? Like, what is it? Having those clearly defined in the very beginning for Web3 projects is more almost more important than Web2 projects. Um, and because there's no VC that will be making sure that you have a great team in Web3 because you're doing your own token raises. And so what ends up happening is like you short circuit a lot of the kind of built-in traditional mechanisms that have been in place for the VC and PE industry for some time to ensure success. And you kind of have to artificially or virtually embed those back into the way that you do business.
And on the other side of the coin, like, do you think that's something you can see in one or two calls? Like Sasha and I are VCs, so we invest. We get pitched all the time. We've probably could have avoided some disasters if we had picked up on this earlier, that the team just doesn't mesh, or they're in it for the wrong reasons, etc. So, is there anything that you can, like, little subtle giveaways? Do you think?
Oh yeah, I mean, if an individual, I mean, this is not a knock on it, people who are in gig economy, but
Yeah.
like if it's more so like the background of the individual is a bunch of like 6 month, 8 month activities and not really sat in an organization where they learned structure,
Hmm.
governance, and dealt with like a pressure from like an apparatus. I think that's also a telling sign. Now, I'm not saying you need to have those, but man, it helps a lot when you're in enterprise. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
All right. So don't start a company with digital nomads. Noted. So, and then I think the last question. Well, we've got, I guess, one actual last question, but before we get there, just to give us a quick recap, Jeff, what are you most excited about around Hedera Foundation, what you're working on right now?
Oh wow. There's things I can talk about. There's things I cannot talk about. But we'll be coming over the pike soon. Obviously, my work in Vietnam has, from an APAC growth perspective, has thing that keeps me up at night as well as wakes me up in the morning. I mean, I love emerging economies, and then also the solving the pain points that can be addressed there, whether it's from payments or basically the ability to bank the unbanked and asset management. All of these things are really exciting for me because it's really drawing impact, right? So that's what I'm really excited about, like developer and builder communities, working with our partners in Vietnam to get that to happen, working with policymakers to educate and also proliferate Web3 in a sustainable and also responsible way. That's another big thing. And then finally, just being able to kind of get in early and then integrate technology into these large corporations that seem to be untouchable, conglomerates that were like, okay, we're good at what we do. You missed the boat 40 years ago. But now they're open and the whole playing field has been reset. So I think it's a really, really unique time in specific markets like Vietnam. And so that's what I was really excites me. And then of course on the established markets like on Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, and Japan and others, really being involved in the evolution of financial hub, and then also industry participation. There's a lot of work to be done there, and just working with other peers in the industry, from protocols as well as to firms and Web3 native companies, has also been extremely exciting. And then finally, just bringing projects into the ecosystem.
So much happening all at
Yeah.
once. I don't know how you get enough sleep. Well, we're going to go to our last question. Before we do, I want to thank you very quickly. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure. And for all of our viewers, if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure you tap or smack or hit that like button. And then make sure you give us a follow or subscribe. We've got plenty of more fun Boom Room interviews coming and some more eye tests and some more fun panels as well. If you're interested at all in what Jeff is working on and learning more about Hedera and the Hedera Foundation, make sure you check out the links in the show notes below. And yeah, Carmelo, take it away.
Yeah, maybe some exciting alpha coming soon. We gotta keep an eye out for. We also end every interview the same way, but obviously, except for anything we've been discussing or Hedera Foundation itself, what are you most excited about in the next 12 months? It can be a project, it can be a narrative. It doesn't. We're not so strict with that. We're only strict with it can't be something you're actively working on, because obviously we've been talking about that.
Yeah, that's cheating.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Oh my gosh. I would say the thing that I'm probably most excited about in the industry is the potential for how should I say this properly? Financial institutions and large technology companies getting deeply embedded into more of the protocols. So I potentially see like deeper partnerships with traditional enterprises coming in and say like, this is my chain of choice, or eventually ripping out their entire Web2 infrastructures over the next like many years, and then adopting a standard and then bringing that in, whether that's on the EVM or that's on Hedera or some private instance of something else. That's what I'm really, really most excited about. And when it comes to each jurisdiction, I'm most excited about, again, emerging markets like Vietnam and Central Asia.
Wow, I don't think we've had people just be bullish on a whole region, but it absolutely makes sense. Especially that's where a lot of our focus is as well. We love that entire region. So great answer.
Yeah, fantastic, man. Well, Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's so much fun talking to you. It's great meeting you all the time wherever we meet, and I'm very much
Yep.
looking forward to seeing you again. We've got to have you on to talk more about Hedera and recent developments. And again, to all of our viewers, make sure you check out the links in the show notes to learn more about Hedera. thank you so much, brother. And yeah, hopefully see you again soon.
Yeah, I'll see you around soon. Thanks, everybody.
Ciao.
Thanks, everyone. Ciao.